thank you everyone for coming this evening for the launch of the School Exclusion Project. But first, we are going to follow protocol, and we have Daniel here from Wurundjeri Council to give a welcome to country in Dover.
Never had microphone, right? This is about exclusion.
For the people on the Zoom.
Oh, right.
All right, now I've got to use the microphone, right? So this is about exclusion. So look at all those naughty fellas up the back, excluding themselves. Come down the front, bring it down. It's about being together, right? My name's Daniel Ross, and I'm a proud Wurundjeri man. And I want to share some of my story, my ancestors' story with you all. And Bunjil is our creator, the wedge-tailed eagle. Bunjil created everything we see, from the stars in the sky to the roots of the trees in the ground. He taught us how to listen, how to care. What does that mean? It's 2024. A season called Porneet. When the wattle blooms, we pause and we check in on our old people. 2 years ago, we lost Uncle Archie. Last year, I had to visit my own mum. 3 weeks ago, I lost a dear friend. And there was a wattle in bloom. But there's a flip side. We see yam daisies coming to flower, tadpoles in ponds. Those fresh little minds in those classrooms, they're the new beginnings. That's what we do our why with. Scary, right? Guiding those minds. How do we include them? We're talking about exclusion. And I'll share a story about my nephew only a few weeks ago. But we were taught how to listen, how to care for one another, for country, because it's reciprocal. We know that if we get the balance right, it returns the favour tenfold. There's the Birrarung, the Yarra River runs through, 236 years ago, everything we knew would change. And the Birrarung, the Yarra River, runs through country like the blood in our veins, providing resource and life. The MCG was once a place of song, dance and ceremony. Tandarum, where we would come together and share, trade. Unless you went to Tay Tay, 3 weeks ago, then you're probably there dancing as well, right? But those places wouldn't be home for long. We were forced off to places like Bollambol and Billabong, and then they established this place known as Coree. And Coree was one of the most profitable missions in the country. Yet, we weren't allowed to speak our native tongue. We had to learn to read and write English before we'd be forwarded a paycheck. Wow. Caring for country, making some fella rich, but we had to learn to read and write English before we could get a paycheck. At that mission, Uncle Billy was our headman, and he negotiated our first treaty with John Batman. 12 axes, a few bags of rice, and a couple of blankets. But the Crown ripped it up, you see. We weren't worth that much. But at that signing were two little fellas, true to how we've all done business through time, passing our knowledge from old to young. Uncle Simon Wonga and Uncle William Barak. And they both advocated tirelessly for the betterment of First Peoples and for Victorians as a whole. They knew the knowledge they held would benefit generations well beyond their time. My great-grandmother had the tribal name, Bullum, and it means white butterfly. Gentle, caring, nurturing. By the old term, Nam was full blood, but had fair skin and fair hair. So when she went to school, she wasn't allowed to play with the coloured kids, nor was she allowed to play with the Anglo kids, because they didn't know where to put her. But she would be instrumental in opening the first health service for Aboriginal people right here in Victoria, known as VARS today. The old people in our lives have a way of knowing, guiding, nurturing. 1967, we had a referendum and we voted yes. Aboriginal people are human, which is a really strange concept considering we've cared for country since the beginning of time. Then there's my story. And my first day of school, I wanted to share stories of Bunjil, our creator, Wah, the crow who brought us fire, Willert, the possum who would grow with us, keep us warm, Yeah, I'm still not keen on Mindy. She's a snake. It scares me, right? And that's even at 21 now. But my first day of school was traumatic. I was told I wasn't Aboriginal because I was fair skinned, because I was white, by my peers, by my principal. I went home broken, cried. My grandfather sat me down and he explained to me Bunjil's law on how we listen, how we care, how we come together collectively as one. And that I was born in the daytime and my cousins were born at night, and that's why I was fair and they were dark and all this other rubbish that even I knew was silly, right, at 5 years of age. But it made me laugh. It got me back to that place called school, got me learning. And then I finished and I said, I ain't going back to that place. It's horrible. And then I became an electrician. No one told me that was the most school-intensive trade there was. I'm never doing that again. And then at 30, I went back to university. And then I said, yeah, that's done. I went back again. And again. Yeah, don't do it again, right? But I will. Because there's this thirst of learning. There's this thirst to share the knowledge that we learn from our old people, from our peers, those lessons learned to guide those future generations. Bunjil's law, how we listen, how we care. Only a few weeks ago, my nephew was sat in the corner of the room because the teacher was too hard for him too difficult to deal with him. And he's a proud little Aboriginal fella, but he's got fair hair and fair skin. Teacher said, yeah, you're wasting too much time going to the men's group. What do you want to do that for? Our connection to one another is solid. We walk into a room and we look around and we know when we're with other community and we feel safe. That's how we build the strength in those young minds to guide them, teach them, and become upstanding citizens of a community that we stand collectively as one. So I want to pay respects to my elders past and present. I want to pause and pay my respects to all of you and acknowledge your elders past and present also. Woman Jika Arundri Bullock, Yemen Gundibek. In the Woiwurrung language, I just said, welcome to the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. Our traditional lands go west to the Werribee River, north to the Great Divide, east to Mount Borbor, and south to Mordialloc Creek. Now, this is where I need your help. We're going to do star jumps, right? No, we're not. I haven't done them for a long time. But if you can repeat after me, that would be fantastic. Nun. That was lackluster. Come on. We can do better than that. Nun. Godjin. You just learned how to say thank you in Woiwurrung. Nun Godjin.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I also just want to acknowledge your ancestors and your old people and thank you for the custodianship and the deep knowledge systems that you continue to take care of today that have cared for these lands since time immemorial. So thank you. Wow, I feel like that just set up the room really nicely. And so what I'm about to say from a little bit of a script is going to be really boring. But no, I'm Hayley McQuire. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition. I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening for the launch of the School Exclusion Project. We are live streaming as well, so kutamuli to those online. Yeah, so today actually marks what people in Australia call Harmony Day, but everywhere else it's referred to as the International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And it just so happened that this year it's also National Day for Closing the Gap. We wanted to choose and launch the report on this day because we wanted to make it clear that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been excluded, and this is what the report outlines, from the learning system since its very establishment. There is no harmony in school exclusion. We can't close the gap while our kids are being excluded. The National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition is, and you'll see our team, they're here in these deadly little shirts. You can buy different colorways online, but we are committed to making sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people have self-determination throughout their learning lives. And we do this because we believe that, and it says so in the Coolangatta Statement on Indigenous People's Rights to Education, that young people and the youth have a special and unique role in fighting for our Indigenous, that's not the quote here, youth and the young have a special place and responsibility in the struggle to nurture and project Indigenous cultures because it is to them that truth and wisdom are bequeathed. And I think that's the role and responsibility that young people have in creating a fairer and safer learning system that is self-determined by our mob and for our mob. It's also why, accompanying this report tonight, we've also developed a youth guide, School Exclusion 101, to support young people to understand this history, but also to provide strategies and tools on ways that we can collectively challenge it. This report serves as an act of truth-telling. Behind the numbers, facts, the events, the real lived experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and communities. I can speak for my team, but I'll also speak for me, but we all have this personal lived connection of the stories that are in this report. So keeping that in mind, I share this report and I share this history, acknowledging that this is a living history that continues to impact us today, and that by understanding this history, it's the context that we need to enable us to create the systems of learning that, create the very systems that we want to change. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge that behind these statistics are real stories, real people. And I think, lastly, what you'll also find in this report is the stories of resistance. Since the very beginning, since our people have been excluded, our families and communities have advocated for our right to learn, and our right for our children to live and thrive. And so I feel like that's the greatest strength, and that's with this spirit of collective action and energy that we can really work together to end exclusion, end the ongoing impacts of racism and discrimination that it has within our schooling system. But I hope that this report also challenges us all to think about what we can do to imagine a learning system that is completely free from exclusion. We're going to hear from our amazing research team in a minute, but I do want to thank and acknowledge Emma Swami, who is in the room tonight, and they have done the beautiful design and illustrations that you'll find in the report. Yeah, so acknowledge Em, and I also want to acknowledge that this report was also funded from the Australian Centre at the University of Melbourne. And thanks to the research team for pulling that all together. To be honest, this kind of work and why we wanted to focus on school exclusion was, one, because we listen to young people and they're telling us about their experiences. And we wanted to create our own Education Justice League within NIYEC, which is like our youth-centred think tank. But then the research team, Maddie, Beth and Archie and Samara, who's on our team, said, hey, let's work together on providing the historical context of school exclusion. And I feel like this has just been an act of allyship, which we'll be able to use to support more young people and validate the experiences and like the real experiences of our young people. It's not just anecdotal anymore. When young people can share their stories now, they can point to this report and say, it's not just me and it's not just my generation, it's happening and it's because of this history. So with that, I also just want to thank the research team for your allyship and your support and your hard work in pulling this all together. And I also want to acknowledge Samara Hand, who is from our team, but part of the research team behind the report. She's currently on Turtle Island doing her PhD. So we got some fancy ones on the NIYEC team. They say always employ people that are smarter than you. So that's the role that I take on as CEO very seriously. But with that, I'd like to hand over to the research team who are going to provide an overview of some of the key findings. Thanks.
Okay, good evening, everybody. G'day. My name is Maddie Keynes. On behalf of Beth and Archie, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Wurundjeri country and we want to pay our respects to elders of this place, past and present. We also want to acknowledge the long history of self-determined education here on Wurundjeri country at places like the Coree College in Fitzroy and Northland Secondary College in Preston. Beth, Archie and I are all non-Indigenous settler historians of education who've been working together for quite a few years now on some different topics. But what we found in our own historical research on education was a number of patterns. And we noticed those patterns across different states and different time periods. And exclusion from school was one of the persistent patterns that we all found in our work. And another pattern was government failure to provide access to school. And we saw this enacted in different systems and different places and in slightly different ways, but all having similar exclusionary effects. And we could see a kind of continuity and some echoes between these histories and contemporary policies and discourse that sort of talk about Aboriginal education as a problem. And so, for instance, the role of policing in monitoring school attendance now and the disproportionate ways that that gets enacted on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students has these deep historical roots that go right back to the foundation of education systems. So when we met Samara and we learned that she was doing some similar research on New South Wales, we thought, well, a national overview was something that was needed to show these connections. So we wanted to challenge histories of schooling in this country that have been written that tend to celebrate education as something uplifting and something that's celebratory, kind of expanding access and opportunity for all, but that didn't tend to acknowledge the ways Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students had been excluded. So how did we go about this? We divided up the research into different jurisdictions, and we started with the written histories of which there was very little information to be found. So we turned to the archives, and in there we did find some information, but it was very uneven. In some instances, we found a total lack of records about Aboriginal education. For instance, in Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia, no specific records were created because there was no sort of separate system policies for Aboriginal education developed until the 1960s. So if you're interested in hearing more about the historical methodology, you can come and talk to us later, but I'll stop there. But what we haven't done in this research is attempt to capture those experiences that Hayley mentioned, or the school level kind of policies which do play a role. And there's lots of research we did that didn't make it into the report you have, but there's also lots more to be done. I hope you can join us in some of that work maybe. So to the findings, importantly, we actually want to start with the last one listed up here. And Hayley mentioned it already, and I think it's probably the most important, which is one of the patterns we observed is that Aboriginal communities have consistently sought out, petitioned for, campaigned for access to schooling and for a higher quality of education. And there's also a clear record of communities fighting back against exclusions that took place, often as a result of their campaigning for better access and higher quality. And finally, contest over the quality, access and type of schooling available for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children has always been present, and that fight continues today. So I'll pass over to Beth for the next two.
Thanks, Maddie. I also just want to start by acknowledging that we're on Wurundjeri country tonight. Okay, so I'm going to start with number one, our first big finding, and that is that there has been systemic exclusion across all government schools. So unlike other settler colonies in Canada and the US, where the education of Indigenous people was the responsibility of the federal government. So that meant that there was a more uniform policies and records were kept in a centralised way. Here in Australia, the education of all children has instead been the responsibility of the colonies and then later the states. So the states developed their own school systems and education departments. And because states had control of schools and the conditions within states varied so much, the history of systemic exclusion is actually very messy. It's quite ad hoc. And this, I think, contributes to why so much of it remains unknown. So the foundational education legislation made no reference to Indigenous children, and the systems were designed only with settler children in mind. Nonetheless, all state school systems, including those that were responsible for schooling in the Northern Territory, found ways to exclude Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students from school. So this happened at different times in different places, but exclusion was the result. These forms of exclusion were added into school systems after they were founded. So this kind of happened as a result, as Maddie mentioned, as more and more Indigenous families started to test the school systems that claimed to be free and compulsory for all, regardless of gender, race or religion. So in response to increased demands for schooling, education departments actually created new policies and clauses to legitimate the exclusion of Indigenous students. This directly contravened the responsibility that they had to ensure that all children were attending school. And in some states, this was formalised through explicit policy, which I'll talk about soon. But in other states, like here in Victoria, no policies were developed, and instead exclusion was done in an underhanded way. And this lack of policy has also meant that historical accountability is really difficult to pursue because there were no government records created specifically about the education of Aboriginal students. And this remains a structural issue in Victoria, where accessing accurate records about school exclusion, schools' practices of excluding Aboriginal students is ongoing, and Archie will talk more about that soon. So our second big finding was that most governments failed to provide access to schooling for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. This was sometimes a result of indifference or apathy. The government just didn't care, but it was also often a deliberate choice to withhold schooling from communities. So in some cases, state education departments colluded with other government departments and protection boards to deliberately withhold schooling. And this was sometimes done to try to coerce Aboriginal communities to move away from where they were living, for example. Other education departments also developed policies to more easily allow the exclusion of Aboriginal students, and I think probably New South Wales is the most well-known example. This included policies like exclusion on demand, where the education department would bar Aboriginal children from certain schools based on complaints from white parents and communities. And these complaints were often propped up by local government. And this this included the creation of separate schools for Aboriginal students. These were often staffed by unqualified teachers, delivering a limited program of curriculum in under-resourced schools. So these are just some of the methods that governments have developed to exclude Indigenous students from education in this country.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Beth and Maddie, and I'm Archie Thomas, and I'll also acknowledge that we're on Wurundjeri country. I'm going to talk about findings 3 and 4, which kind of bring us up to the question of ending school exclusion today. So finding number 3, which is about how exclusion continues to occur through disproportionate use of discipline within schools that's directed at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. So there's a really excellent, inspiring history from the 1960s and 70s onwards of Aboriginal organisations like the National Aboriginal Education Committee and others who campaigned to end the exclusion on demand policies that Beth was talking about, train Indigenous teachers, Indigenise curriculum, and start Indigenous controlled schools. So that's a really powerful legacy that still lives on in Aboriginal education policy today. But since this point, we've increasingly seen the use of so-called, race-blind measures of discipline directed at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in disproportionate ways. This is happening right now in every state and territory, and the rates of suspension and expulsion continue to rise. On average, Indigenous students across Australia are expelled around 2.5 or 3 times more often than other students. And it continues to rise even for younger students, so students in prep and so on. So by placing this in a kind of historical context, we hope to kind of build an understanding that these measures are not in fact, race blind, but a consequence and a legacy of the long history of systemic racism in the education system, which we still need to address and campaign against. And so number 4 relates to how we might do this. It's the problem of the access to adequate data and how that kind of produces a lack of scrutiny of these racist practices. So, statistics in most states and territories are available in relation to Indigenous students and other students, but they don't often, only in Queensland, for example, do they show you why the students are actually expelled. There's a data map in the report, which you can have a look at, which kind of goes through all of this. Legislation does, compel states and territories to report this information, but it's not shared publicly. In some cases, you can access it through really expensive FOI requests, that are, of course, inaccessible to most communities. One of the things that means is that we don't know in most states and territories the reasons and justifications for the expulsion and suspension of students. But when researchers were able to access this data in Queensland, for example, they found that suspension expulsion wasn't just used as a last resort and wasn't just used in kind of instances of safety, for example, which is what the policies, say it should be technically. So those same researchers also found that if Indigenous students who were also disabled or Indigenous students who were also in out-of-home care were much more likely to be suspended or expelled. So more data to really understand the way that those intersections work for a number of different students is really crucial, I think, to addressing the problem. And the fact that we aren't unable to access this data, I think, hides, the extent of the problem. So what we do know, however, from research in Australia and overseas is that suspension and expulsion does not work for the students it is targeted at. And we know that the lack of data is kind of a problem with the way that they're kind of using to campaign, like we need it in order to kind of campaign against ongoing suspension and expulsion. And we need it, I think, ultimately to advance the goal of ending school exclusion, which was part of the reason we took on this work. And thanks for letting us do that.
That was you still need to read the full 78 pages, okay? You can't just do the cliff notes. We've got to get into the detail. But thank you for the very comprehensive overview for that. So yeah, a huge amount of work going through the archives and a whole bunch of different sources to kind of piece together this timeline that you'll see and the patterns that you'll see that come through the report. Now, because we are a youth organisation, we have to shake it up. And also, I'm 33, so I need to make sure that you see that there are people working for us that are legitimately young. So with that, I'd like to welcome up until a month ago, Lay was our youngest team member. They are now our second youngest. But they are also soon to be published author, a poet, and incredible truth teller and project lead on our Learn Our Truth program. And so Lay will do a spoken word performance before we head into our panel.
Sorry, I have to scroll back to the top. I guess, yeah, always starting by acknowledging country, and today we are meeting on the Wurundjeri country. And I came down, well, at the front of this building, no, not on the campus. When you go up to Parkville, you see a Womanjika on the front, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, like come with purpose, Womanjika. I came down here to learn. I came down here for university. I'm actually going back home now that I've finished, and that's been a really important part of my journey. And I just want to acknowledge that that was only possible because of the ongoing activism of the Coree mob down here and the Wurundjeri people who persist in the face of colonialism. Yeah. So my name's Lay Maloney. I'm a Gumbaynggirr and Gungandji person. I was born up in Cairns, and I moved to New South Wales when I was about 6. This is relevant because it's in my little speech. So there's a little speech and there's a poem. So you get 2 in 1. So Yarrabah is the biggest mainland Aboriginal community on the continent. It takes up 156 square kilometers of Gungaji Indigenous land. In 1897, the Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of Sale of Opium Act was implemented across Queensland reserves and missions. During the late 1800s, hundreds of Indigenous and South Sea Islander children were stolen from their parents and housed in the dormitories at Yarrabah. Yarrabah State School opened on January 1st, 1892. The children attended school until year 6, but plantation work took priority over education, and any wages were paid to their protectors until the adults became laborers and domestics with rations for wages. The school I went to, Yarrabah State School, is the same one those kids were forced into to attend after being stolen from their families. I wonder if they watched the Seahawks, saw it across the bay too. The first day I met my biological father was at 52 Gribble Street. He asked me if I'm going to school tomorrow, and I told him, I'll go to school if you come with me. Next day, he rocked up with me to school dates and met my homeroom teacher. While us kids were brushing his teeth, he got bailed up by the principal. The principal proceeded to interrogate why I missed 149 days of school. Dad said he only met me yesterday. Yeah. I have paperwork to prove it. When I moved with Dad to New South Wales, I was enrolled in the Aboriginal Catholic school my grandmother and all her siblings attended. This was before she was stolen and forced into domestic labour in Sydney. St. Mary's sits on the tallest hill in Barraville. The only thing higher than it is the dark brown brick church reaching for the clouds. Hidden behind that building is a little white church building. When I attended, it was the senior primary students' classroom taught by a black teacher, Miss Donovan. When my nanas and Popeyes attended St. Mary's, that was the Aboriginal classroom. Aboriginal students were segregated from white students who learned in the main building. Mean nuns caned them for mispronunciation of English words, for sitting incorrectly, or whatever else didn't meet their standards. They were told it was a sin to be black, and they had to repent. They prayed to God, Jesus, Mary, or whoever else may forgive them for the sin of being born black. Indigenous babies are born with a name and a target on their back, born to live 10 years shorter than the average Australian, born to die young just because they dare to be black, born to dream about a time they will never be in. Indigenous children do not get second chances. They get one shot to make it, or multiple shots if they don't. Body cam recording, you better replay that bit. Bubba, come on now. You better go to school today. It's not about learning. They got nothing to teach you, Bubba. You don't gotta go to school today. You don't go to school today and they'll take you away. You're not like them white kids. You don't get to stay home, Bubba. They're watching you, argus-eyed and cruel, waiting for you to muck up one day. They'll blame it on the fact you're Aboriginal. If they're not watching you, they're looking the other way. I was a blonde, blue-eyed kid on the mission. I'm the fairest one of all my 10 siblings. I guess that's why I fare so well. There's a funny thing that happens when I point out privilege in my white passing complexion. They hear, I don't work hard, from the, am treated better because I look white. And I am treated better because I look white. The invisibility of pale bodies blend into the settler dream. I am their worst nightmare, a black looking white, knowing they will never achieve their fantasy of a clean slate in the state. Our rivers of blood dyed this land red. Our tears filled the rain clouds and shed upon the green canopy. Our bones break and ground into dust, blanketing the shores. Our rivers, our ancestors are everywhere, and they are all they see. Stars are bright pupils of the sky looking down on the world. Always was and always will be watching. They saw all the policies unfurl, and I see you, the pearls you were clutching. end the innocence of settler futurity, stop the cycle that pulls kids from one detention to another. Stand on your tippy toes and reach for the heavens. Dare to dream and go further. Where land is back, where country is healed, where Palestine is free, where Indigenous children get to grow old and grey. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. Next 1 minute you're laughing, the next minute you're like, oh, yeah. That's the power of the arts and spoken word. Thank you, Lay. Well, we now moved into our final section of the evening, our distinguished panel. If I could ask you to come and take a seat, any seat. Yeah, welcome. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, have a seat. Pull up a chair. All right. Wow. What an incredible discussion so far. So much to unpack. And I'm just so proud to have the distinguished panel that we have with us tonight. So I won't do the full bios. The full bios are around, and trying to introduce this panel fully wouldn't do it any justice. So I just want to thank Coree, Dr. Crystal McKinnon, Professor Mark Rose, and Alinta Williams for joining us this evening. I'd like to just start off and get straight into it with Uncle Mark. You know, this report provides that history of exclusion across every state and territory. And, you know, as someone with such deep experience of being involved in education across decades, especially deeply in the education movement here in Victoria, what are your thoughts or reflections about seeing this history and the types of exclusion and methodologies that are present in the report?
Great question. Brother, thank you for your welcome to country. I bring the compliments of my elders and the respect of my ancestors to this gathering tonight. So thank you, brother, for that. Look, I think it's great. The findings are great. And I got to be honest, there's nothing in it that I'm not surprised at, because I've been on the front line for decades. Just be careful how many decades, all right? It's unspecified, but I've been there as a teacher. I've been there as a principal. I've walked away from education because we had a chat earlier today, and we didn't know each other. We've got, but it's the industrial classroom that we have to dismantle. And what we have out there are vestiges of that industrial classroom, and it shows up in exclusion. As a principal, you know, and as a teacher in a staff room, I got sick and tired of kids' future being run down over bad Nescafe coffee, you know, not even good coffee, but, you know, kids being vilified, you know, and it's the industrial system. If you want, can I just say, every so often you come across a beacon, you know, sometimes I get really sad and sometimes I get really, seeing Hayley, you and your team and the work that you're doing. Education happens best when the people grab it and run with it. And you owning this and running with it is a beacon of light in a system that can be very depressing. But go back to the basic premise of Aboriginal education. I've read all the Bloom's to Pasternak, all the latest taxonomy, and Aboriginal education philosophy is the strongest and the best. And if you're an academic and you want to lift your ratings, go and become relational in your teaching. Yeah. We transfer knowledge through relationship, not through transaction. The industrial one is full of transaction and power. The teacher becomes the learner becomes the teacher in a seamless exchange, and we educate the whole person, birth to death. So I'll let someone else have a talk, but I want to talk about the revolution you young people are leading. And as I was watching you, and that was a beautiful reading. Thank you, Bub. But I thought about Auntie Gladys up in Yarrabah, and she was the one who danced when the Mabo decision came down. And she told me at a conference once that they decided to, the women in Yarrabah decided to go to one of the principals in a remote community at not Yarrabah, but up in the far north, and knocked on the door and said to the Western principal, "Thank you for your work, but your time's up. We're going to run the school." And the principal said, "Oh, okay," packed her bag and went from Brisbane. And the women took over the school. And when the mob takes over the school, you know, and more principals should have that door knocking. I'm going to shut up now.
No, please, I could listen to you forever. Well, building off that, because you said the power of the community resistance and the power of our families and our parents, you know, I feel like we always got that one grandma or that one auntie who's rolled up to the principal's office, you know, like when something's happened, you know, you all got that one. But anyway, so I'm really keen to hear from you, Cos, and yeah, what's your perspectives or thinking around like the really importance of that family resistance, and given your connections to both Northland College and Code schools, which are featured in the report. Yeah, what's the importance of having that history of resistance?
Thanks, Hayley. Yeah, first I just want to say thanks for inviting me with these amazing people. Reconnect with Unc as well. Daniel, thanks for the welcome. Lay, that was beautiful. I actually privileged to do some dances from Yarrabah and Cookieology for a long period of time. So that's that teaching, that's continuation. So it's really, you know, beautiful to see that and hear that. There's a whole heap, hearing everyone talk about a whole heap of things that I probably took for granted when I was a young person. My family on both sides come from a long line of fighters, and you know, on mum's side there's Uncle William Cooper, that's my great grandfather's brother, the walk off, obviously Cumra, and then mum was the first career educator and worked around Northlands when Northlands was shut down. So I remember being a young fella, you know, fundraising to keep those schools alive and visiting code schools, and then also Uncle Bruce was a teacher of my dad's as well for the Coree College days. Both parents went to Coree College. So I think, you know, it was going to be passed into myself and my brother's hands. And, you know, he was a poster boy for the Northland Secondary College. You may have seen there's a picture of Alistair Thorpe. That's my older brother. He probably would have been the right person to sit here. But yeah, I'm privileged to understand the threads of why this is important and why this is important now to post-referendum, post all the information that we know about blackfellas and what we're still, the ongoing systemic issues that we deal with. And I realise every day the privilege that I had at going to Northland Secondary College. So if you don't know about Northland Secondary College, it fought super hard to keep Jeff Kennett out, the Muppet that we used to call him. And, you know, we had some powerful people supporting that. You know, we had Uncle Gary Foley, Uncle Rob, obviously used to be a part of the Coree College. That's my dad's brother. My mum and Auntie Deidre Bucks, Auntie Trish Welsh, to name a few people, Jill Morgan. There's a lot of people that are unsung heroes that fought. There's a lot of people that allowed that to happen. And then the investment was the reason why it worked, because post that we started the school back up again. And like I was fortunate that I went to school with 150 blackfellas, and in a time when racism was still rife in Melbourne, you go to sport and all those sorts of things. It meant that you wanted to go to school because you're seeing your cousins, you're seeing people that you're extended to, but then you were spending time with cousins and working on different sort of projects, or just getting out of the house where there was things going on. So for me, it's like I do sort of have to take a step back, because the kids these days don't get that opportunity, and they struggle. They're one out. Kessos are one out, and the importance of being connected, like Unc said, it's a relationship. I mean, that's how we thrive for 60,000 years. It's the relational learning, the hands-on, the actual investment into family and connection is the important part of like culture. And that's part of the culture that we need to heal. So for me, it's such an important part, but you need to have the allies, you need to have the investment. And if you don't, we see it fall down very quickly. And, that's what we see right now across the education system.
Thanks, Cos. And I think, as NIYEC, we're really lucky that, we're all about seeing a First Nations led system here in Australia. And it's because of the history of resistance and the examples like Northland, like Code, that set the stage, that say, it's possible. Like, what our ambitions are is possible. Like, they're not some lofty kind of thing, because we've already seen it. They've worked. We just need to think about what is the infrastructure we need to make that scale. But building off that, Crystal, you're both an academic, a historian, but also an incredible community organizer. So how do we make sure that we are learning from this history, or that what can we learn from this history to inform our current kind of collective action? Do you think that there are any kind of strategies or from the past that would help us today? Or I guess conversely, do we need to do things a little bit different now?
Thank you.
That was about 1,000 questions in one. Can you please just summarize that?
I took some notes.
Yeah.
I'm not a good I can't just speak, I need notes sometimes. So I thank you for having me, and thank you, Daniel, for your beautiful welcome, and Lay also for your beautiful words. And it's an honor and privilege to be here. So thanks for having me. I think one of the things that struck me when I read the report was about school exclusion. It doesn't just impact the kid, it impacts the entire family, which is what both Cos and Uncle Mark, Professor Mark, are talking about in terms of the relationality of Aboriginal families, all families. Yeah. And I think the impacts on families and communities, I think, is really important, because all of us have, stories from our parents, our grandparents, about being excluded or being expelled or being punished. Lots of us have those personal stories ourselves as well. And one of the things I think about what the importance of history is, and the importance of the work that you guys are doing and the launch of this report too, is understanding history shines a light, I think, on communities' experiences and families' experiences, and also our cultural memory and our, the memories that are passed down, and then inform the way that we as individuals interact with, the schooling system and beyond into university, and, and what we teach also to our nephews and nieces. And it really does inform that. And I think the other thing about history too is that it helps to uncover the systemic racism, which is, the way that our schooling system is structured, which I also think the report's really great at showing, the links between the police and the health system and the schools, and the way these all interact to police Aboriginal kids and to punish and be a punitive site for way too many people. And history, I think when we look at history and, what you guys have done in terms of following from first contacts through, and the first legislations through to the present, really does reveal the systemic racism and the way that the systems are structured and pitted against us. Yeah. And that, the best responses are, as Mark and Cos have said, the community schoolings that happened and the community resistance, like in Northlands, which was a long campaign in order to fight against Northlands closure, you know, because it was important to the community and important to the families that all went there. Yeah, so I think it's funny, I was thinking before when you guys were talking too, and I had a quick look, so I was like thinking about the stories that I've been told and the stories I know from history, and I understand there's other historians in the room whose area of expertise this is and not mine, but thinking about when you mentioned Uncle William Cooper and, you know, Shadrach James at Maloga Mission. Actually wrote down the dates, so because I was like, what were the dates of that? Because I was like, I was sure, you know, because he was a teacher and he married Auntie Ava. Yeah.
My grandmother as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, he was a non-Indigenous, it's your family history. Sorry, as experts. No. You know, but I was thinking about the importance of education because, you know, Shadrach James was at Maloga Mission in 1883, everybody. And then, and then that was closed and then Cummeragunja opened and then in 1888, he started that school. And at that school, he taught his wife, Auntie Ada, Uncle William Cooper, Uncle Jack Patton, Sir Doug Nichols, Eric and Bill Onus, you know, who founded the Australian Aboriginal League and were like, you know, revolutionaries and led a lot of the resistance in this early times, you know. And so the importance of education in kind of creating community and also creating resistance, I think can't be underestimated either. And that's why Northlands is such an important, an important movement in terms of, you want to...
Oh, look, I can talk. I'll talk all night on this stuff. But yeah, Shadrach James obviously come from Mauritius to come to be a surgeon, wasn't able to be a surgeon and then wanted to work with, you know, Aboriginal people and then went to Coomera and married and had a ton of kids. So it's a lot. I was fortunate I've been to Mauritius and met family from over there as well. So, you know, that's the importance of that is, you know, the strength that it's been given for our Northlands itself. I mean, the people that have come from that as well, post, and we know what happens when kids don't go to school or have the ability to learn in a safe environment, and their identity part of it as well. It's not just the education part of it. So.
Did you have?
Okay.
Well, just thinking about, I think it's also important to think around that, you know, different kids have different needs out of an education system. What our kids need is to be connected to who they are and to come out strong and solid as young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think that's what also the Coolangatta statement on rights of Indigenous people to education says, is like our education rights are concerned with our right to be Black, to be Indigenous, to be ourselves. So yeah, I think that's just, thank you so much for that. Now, Alinta, you're an educator by trade, and currently working to support more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander educators through your work at the Victorian branch of the AU. So I'm really keen to hear your reactions on the report, but also from your perspective as a teacher. Yeah, what do you think are just the day-to-day challenges or opportunities that exist when we're talking about behaviour management, school exclusion, and, you know, when you're in the trenches every day, sometimes, you know, for us to say, and school exclusion can be like, oh, come on, you do my job then, you know? So, yeah, I'm really keen to hear what your perspectives are.
Thanks, Hayley. And yeah, it's so good to be here. Thank you. Honour and a privilege. And thank you, Daniel. And I've been lucky enough to hear you do a welcome before. And I love the way you make connections to your own schooling and to your family. And yeah, hearing those impacts is very relevant to tonight. So thank you. And Lay, thank you. Make me tear up before I get up here on the panel, but also laugh. So thank you. Yes, so I guess firstly, the report, you know, for me, and we've all sort of talked about it already, is making those connections immediately. I'm thinking about my family and the stories that I heard growing up and, you know, stories from Dad about the white kids being allowed on the bus and the kids from Arambi Mission having to walk to school. I guess there's those overt kind of explicit policies or practices, but then just subtle ones where, he's sitting in his classroom at Cowra Primary School and he's done really well in an assignment and an exam and he's real proud of himself. But the teacher only gives the accolade and acknowledgement to the non-Aboriginal kids in the room. So, that's, unfortunately, perpetuated to today. And as a teacher, like you said, I still unfortunately see some of that, and also my work in union as well. But also I'm really fortunate to see what can happen when people are trying to shift the narrative and change it up a little bit. So I guess, the report for me is just so vital in highlighting really what needs to change, but what the current policies are still really complicit in these Western colonial systems to school exclusion. I mean, even from things like standardized testing, the way that we measure success for students and for young people, it's just so prohibitive to making any positive change for them. And so it's really important to critically evaluate those policies and to really interrogate, like, what are the teachers' roles or what's the school's role in being complicit or maybe resisting that and really trying to push back. So I think there's a couple of opportunities that are exciting, and I get to, like I said, in my job, get to work with mob who are working in schools. And although you hear, there are plenty of stories around feeling isolated or carrying a really huge colonial load, that cultural responsibility, and sort of trying to take all of those things on while you're also teaching your class. There's also some, really great examples of these teachers really pushing and trying to allow those young people in the schools, those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people, to have connection, to have belonging, to celebrate identity. Can be really little things like, running a Coree art club for the kids, and all the way up to, doing a school production that's about Bunjil, or, there's lots of different examples happening all around the state, which is really, really exciting. So lots of opportunities there. Like I said, there's challenges as well. We unfortunately, don't have a lot of mob teaching in schools or as education staff. There's quite a huge disparity there between the number of teachers and support staff and the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. So, but that's what we're trying to do at Union. And, unfortunately, Union wasn't doing a great job of representing mob until very recently. But hopefully now I've got myself and another person as a First Nations organiser there, really with the First Nations member committee, really trying to get this work on the table and out there. So slowly, patient, but definitely an opportunity. And I think the other opportunity is for the general population of teachers and school staff, educators, community, particularly like white settler teachers who are the majority in schools. They're sort of uniquely positioned to use their privilege to sort of shift, these racist narratives, and in solidarity with us, in solidarity with mob. So, and I guess it was really important that today, known as Harmony Day, like you said, by some people, but that it's the International Day of Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And I just wrote it down because I thought there's something, the UN asks us to commit to 3 strands to take a stand against racism. And I thought if all school staff and people could take this on, maybe print it out, put it up in the staff room, might be useful. So the 3 strands are, and I'll just read it, education, including teaching the history of racism, slavery, colonialism, and discrimination. actions, speaking out against intolerance, and becoming agents of change and having the courage and the will to act. So yeah, I think it's a good start. It's a big task, but a good place to start.
Thanks, Alinta. And for our friends in the audience, if you need some help on where to start, we also have a slavery resource and a Frontier Wars resource on our website. So there you go. And yeah, in our youth guide, we have the audit tool, where young people and educators and families can actually audit their own student code of conducts to help with pushing back. So there you go, aligned with the UN and didn't even know it. Now, before I hand over to our Q&A section of the evening, I want to zoom out and think, you know, I feel like sometimes we get so much pressure to make immediate change or make, you know, but I really see that our role as NIYEC and young people is around having that long-term intergenerational vision. I think the report really outlines, like, yeah, it's a timeline, but that's the experiences across multiple generations. And I think in that it creates an opportunity to think about, well, how do we right now act strategically and in the best interest of those generations yet to come? So if we could put our, you know, blue sky thinking on, which is and blue sky, but it's also like completely achievable. What would, and I'm opening this up to the whole panel for your own thoughts or reflections. What could happen? What could our world look like if our learning systems were free from exclusion? Go on, Alinta.
It's a great question. I guess I could maybe rewind a little bit and think, like, if I could imagine a school that was free from exclusion. Did you say the whole world or just the schools? Yeah.
Oh, what would you see the benefits
start
of
with
that
the
bit?
school.
Yeah, start with the school. Go on then. Then we'll zoom out to the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about it from my perspective as a teacher and now the role that I work in, and trying to get more mob into schools and people and just us leading these spaces and self-determined spaces. I'm imagining a place that you'd walk into and you'd immediately have this sense of belonging, connection. You wouldn't be told to go and change your uniform because it's go and change into uniform because there would be no uniform. You wouldn't, there wouldn't be, it would be a place where you felt like I guess what you're explaining, you know, with Northland, like the way that you had your people there who you knew you were just safe with and you wanted to be there, a place you want to go, a place you want to learn. And yeah, a place where we're like teaching our students that they have agency and that they are the really important next generation of critical thinkers who, need to end capitalism and neoliberalism and all that good stuff. That's some blue sky thinking for sure, but that would be great.
It's a great question. I just looked at us up on the big screen at the back. We look like a 60s pop group up here on stilts.
It's a position for my good side too. So that's why I grabbed this chair first.
Look, I remember that when the Melbourne Declaration, Adelaide, it's the Melbourne Declaration that led to ACARA, and Kate Price invited me to be on the first ACARA advisory group. And I remember all us hairy blackfellas sitting in there and saying, this needs to be in the curriculum. Everyone needs to know this. And we'll come from a political perspective. And Paul Hughes, who's a retired leading educator, are you stupid? We want every kid to go home from school saying, yes, I've learned this about my country. So we are poised. When I got to defend the national curriculum during the consultation of 9.0, I went to war with Alan Tudge, who said that it would make kids hate the country and they won't ever fight again. Thank Christ. And I argued that we have the best palette in the world. We have a colonial history that's valid. There's learning in it, but we also have a broad multicultural history. Geographically, we're part of the Pacific and Asia, and we house the world's oldest living continuous history. If we can't write a good curriculum for that, we all should be going back homeschooling. So we have the palette and we're poised to have the best curriculum in the country, but have we got the guts to dismantle that industrial and colonial classroom? And can I just ask a question? Anyone here who wants to put up their hand from the education department tonight? Well, that's a bit of a...
Oh,
I mean, not as a teacher, but as an administrator, sorry. I mean, you obviously do the real work. Sorry. But, you know, why aren't top, education department people here today? You know, this is, again, that revolution at a ground level, and this is where the best change comes from. So more power to you guys, all right? Oh, you got your own.
I always find blue sky questions really difficult. You know, I was thinking back to some of the question that you asked before, and across all sites, I think it's really important for everything to be community-led, which is why I think NIYEC is such an important organisation to be leading these kinds of ways to change and make, you know, school sites less hostile and a better place for Aboriginal kids to learn. You know, and I was thinking, I'm the chair of the Aboriginal Legal Service Board, and yesterday the Attorney General announced that instead of kind of doing some of the reforms on the Bail Act, they're instead going to introduce electronic monitoring of Aboriginal kids, right? And, you know, and thinking about, you know, the impact on that and people's ability to go to school, for instance, you know, like in order to kind of make school a place, I think that is the place it should be, which is safe and, you know, a place that people can, you know, learn and grow and, you know, dream of a future and build their future. And like we have to look at the way these systems interact, I think. And, you know, so for me, like in terms of like a blue sky picture, it's kind of stopping all of the state institutions interacting in ways that hey? Yeah.
Agree. No, I agree with Crystal. I work in Dardimonwara and we do a whole heap of work around working with kids after the fact. We prison work. So we see the thread. So for me, the blue sky we need to have the work done in the systemic issues around that, because we know the direct correlation between our young people going from not school or being connected in directly going straight to juvenile justice or correction facilities. And, you know, we know that, and that's the part I grapple with all the time is how do we creatively remove that? But the blue sky in the schools system for me is it's the safe means that, I mean, we don't have CASOs. There's no need for CASOs. I mean, like the CASO role is a tough role. It's they were modelled off my mum's and Auntie Deidre's role at Northlands. There was 4 of them that did the one school, but there was also 160 families, and so that's the power. The power is with the community and the kids in the school. So how do you do that when you've got a handful of kids that lack voice because the school doesn't want to invest in that because they've only got 5 kids that are Aboriginal, and that's 3 families. Or one family that has 5 kids and 3 of them are troublemakers because they don't know the thread of that family's connection to the intergenerational traumas. So I think for me, it draws on, you know, we pull that string, we've got to tug that string to fix a whole heap of things in that area. And it's an important question because we gotta, that's how we drive for deeper, and I don't like the word change anymore. I think impact, because change only happens, a lot of the time when it's forced, and when, or you're pushed into a corner. No one wakes up in the morning and go, I'm just going to change for no good reason. It's because there's stress, or because there's something happening in life. You don't just go, yeah, let's just go start a piano career. You do, it's because of those things. So for me, it's impact, and this is what that report does for us. It sets a standard of going, putting the power back with the families and the kids, and actually understanding, don't isolate the incidences that are happening in the kids' schools currently. And that's what happens. And they go, oh, this is a one-off, so they sweep it under the carpet and expect the CESO to clean up around it. So how do we, remove that and actually create a raindrop effect and understand that this is happening for every kid still consistently across every school in different ways, because our experiences are different. Like Lay said, fair-skinned Aboriginal kids struggle. I mean, I had a niece get questioned by a 40-year-old teacher, teacher that's been in the education system for 40 years, sorry, and was questioned to the depth of, how are you Aboriginal? And she's 11 years of age, and he was saying, no, tell me your family genealogy. And then went into the next classroom to talk to the cousin, and actually waited. And he goes, oh, my grandfather's Aboriginal and my great-grandmother's not Aboriginal. And he said, that's it. There it is. You're not Aboriginal. And you got like a 7-year-old have to deal with that. So it's those things that this can unlock the change. Sorry, I didn't like that word again. The impact that we can have as a collective. And I think for me, that's the blue sky. It's like, it's not only the CESO roles in education, it's the, ALO roles. That's the cultural overload that we speak about. It's the, how do we, break systemic issues by actually implanting cultural, relational sort of learning tools in every space. I mean, we should be an integral part in every industry, because this is the country that we've thrived on for 70,000 years, 100,000 years, but yeah, I'm very passionate, like we all are, about it. But when you see kids that you've worked with and then funding drops and then they go straight back to juvenile justice because they're not, you can't support them, it breaks your heart. And we know that happens. And I've had instances where teachers have told Centrelink workers to put kids on disability pension because they thought that kid didn't want to be at school. So it's like, this is easy for you. You don't have to worry about life now. So, there's the systemic impact is the reason why we haven't got any forward motion. And it's just like trying to fill up a colander, just keeps pouring out.
I was just thinking when you're talking like blue, like I feel like, as a sister girl of ours 2 days ago, I spoke to her on the phone. She's in Echuca, and her nephew is in year 8 at a school up there, and the teacher was being racist to him, right? And no one would believe him, and he had to record the teacher saying that, and then she went in and had to advocate for him and ripped their heads off, but had a speaker with her and played it. And like, I feel like there needs to be more accountability, but there also needs to be more believing kids and believing that this is the way the system is. And I think it goes to, these stories aren't really recorded, and we all have them anecdotally, or we have our family histories, but they're not actually really recorded anywhere, which is why I think the work you guys are doing is so important. And like in a blue sky way, I think that there needs to be accountability and for, the way the schooling system works and, for teachers and what they are doing to our kids. And you know, and in the Northland Spain again, you know, the family and community investment in the schools gives better outcomes for the kids that are there. And there's kind of this, seems to me in lots of places to be this, you know, separation between family and community and the schooling system. And I think in a blue sky way, like when there's the investment, like Code School, like my aunt worked at the reception at Code School as well, like I spent time there, like the community being invested in the school and helping direct and, you know, really having a say, I think delivers the best outcomes too. So in a blue sky way, that's what I think is like, you know, accountability and then also more community investment and more power in the schools themselves.
Thanks so much. And even though I'm not really panel adjacent, I think for like just drawing on and thinking about what you said, you know, for me, like a learning system free from exclusion means a society free from youth detention. So yeah, I think that's like where I see it as well. It's like we won't need these other. I think, you know, we did some work with In My Blood It Runs, the documentary, and what came really clear in that school, in that movie, was that we talk about all these systems interacting, but at the heart is just like one person or one family interacting across multiple systems. And so I think part of that challenge to us is to also think about, well, maybe the solutions to fixing education lie outside of education completely. And like you're saying, in the hands of our community. So we're now going into the Q&A section. But before we open up the floor, I'd like to just give the audience 5 minutes to chat amongst yourself. You've been listening for a long time. What are your thoughts and reflections? What's bursting at the seams? And then I'll come back. And to our deadly people that are joining online, you can add your questions through to our Q&A chat feature, and we'll get one of the team members to feed that back. But yeah, have a chat amongst yourself, collect some thoughts, and then I'll ask that, yeah, you co-design a couple bits of a couple questions for our esteemed panelists. So I'll give you, I said 5, 2 to 3. Go, have a chat, have a yarn. Have a stretch like Mickey Moody. Okay. Yeah, go. Okay, I'll bring you all back. That was exactly 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Scamming. So yeah, I know now. Oh, I let it get away from me. Okay, come on, bring it back, bring it back. We have our amazing Layla here, who will be our roving mic. But I might just, for the case of time, I might take 2 questions from the audience, and then are we getting any questions online or nah? No? Okay, well, that's all right. We'll get 3 from the audience then. So yeah, have we got any audience questions for our deadly panel? Yep.
Hey, Thara Brown, we're a Yalba Yalba, families from Machuca, Barma, Yorta Yorta country, but acknowledging Wurundjeri country today. I don't know about you, Mob, but I'm a teacher. I lasted 3 years actually in the system and work for Cultures Life now. We're still trying to influence from the outside, but make sure our stories are represented in schools. And I just get so wild at like the top. You know, there's all this deadly work, all these good people, good non-Indigenous teachers I talk to every day that like trying to do stuff in the local community. Obviously good black fellas. But I guess my question is like, is there a yarn through this report, sis, or tonight? I don't know. But just looking into alternative models, like I'm looking at the Gingbanya Freedom School and there's so many deadly like alternatives. Yeah, I just get disheartened. I know that's bad, but if generations have had the same lived experience in school, like sometimes I just want to go F the system, dismantle it all. And what does like land-based cultural care learning look like? And how could like, you know, Aboriginal Australia lead that and bring in still, obviously we're not going to go back to pre-contact in that sense, but like how do we still bring in everyone here? So I guess we just yarned about it as both ex-teachers that have gone out and are still frustrated. Yeah, I thought it could be a good yarn about alternative ed or what that looks like and putting culture at the forefront. But
Might hand that to Alinta and Uncle Mark. Do you reckon?
First of all, alternative ed, if I had an opportunity, I'd change that name to alternative. Everything in education is value-laden and alternative ed, but education, for instance, there's a couple of models out there that I like. The big picture schools, is that name? They're pretty deadly. When I was running the code school, I wanted to change everything around and go from a contract that big models, that big picture school where kids contract what they learn. So, but the other thing is the Alpine School of Leadership, Year 9. I'm the school president, but I'm on leave at the moment because I had a stroke 12 months ago. So, so that's a really good model out there. No Coree kid that's gone to the Alpine School hasn't finished Year 12. And it's about taking kids into the bush and finding the leader within. So it's not a black fellow way, but very much it is. And of course, there's valiant accidental heroes who every day will front up to the staff room and, you know, do playground duty and do the extras. And, you know, when I hope I'm not being unkind when I talk about the industrial classroom, but it still exists out there, and it's like that hegemonic whirlpool. It sucks people into it. I have to catch myself out of, you know, and I get furious if I can express that as group therapy here tonight. When I've sat in groups where people have said all Aboriginal education needs is for the parents to be interested in their kids learning. What bullshit. Every Aboriginal parent is like every parent wants the best for their kids, but it is a leap of faith for a generation or a couple of generations who were excluded completely from education. You know, I sat with a group of parents at the Coree Academy of Excellence, and this fella was white knuckled. He was sitting in a university library, and he was scared shitless over it. You know, it's that transgenerational thing that we need to work on. Teachers are great people, but I wrote this article that is rarely quoted, so most of my articles aren't very well known, but it was called The Sandpit to the Sandstone. And I argued that when the the Adelaide and Melbourne Declaration, the national curriculum came out. It could take 20 years for us to fill because teachers were going to carry the new curriculum who were devoid of Aboriginal perspective in their educations. So how do we break the cycle? And I'm on the Council of Deans of Education at the moment. We're working hard there, but keeping teachers down on the farm in the classroom is really hard. Worldwide shortage. So yeah. So I went right off track then. Sorry. But when you have a stroke, you can blame the stroke. So sorry.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of obviously, but I think for me to challenge the system that we currently have is that we've got to create a system within the system. So I've always thought, I run a dance group. We've been doing it since I was young, and I think that's one of the other reasons why, the identity stuff and being fortunate to carry that for a long period of time. So that privilege, but like a Sunday school, like I think something like the investment to show that mob are still, and where you can actually have a collection of community from the area come in, and you have educators that go, we're going to teach you how to do artifacts, we're going to do basket weaving, and it's once a month, and it's just that's a start. But then you see what that does when people start to snowball and everyone gets together, and then there's investment without, because the thing that when we start to lobby and expect the government to do the right thing, then what do we know? This just becomes about the issues and the budget, and and that for me falls on deaf ears too often in all the spaces that we struggle with. So I would just go let's put our hands up. Who wants to start, developing just outside of that and start spitballing with people that go, I've got a space. We can start talking here. I will come and dedicate my time to talk about, what we know around education of Coree College, but then you can go pre-colonisation. You can start to do dance groups. You can do, genealogy, and you start to then build people's identities. And then you can go, well, you could take this and be strong in yourself. And then that actually helps hinder the issues that we have in the education system, because the thing that we know about education too is that the kids have to grow up and go into the real world. So, I have two daughters, 13 and 10, and, trying to get them to navigate is tough because they're going to have to do this not only through school, but through young adulthood, and adults. And, we're not, just because we're adults, we don't go to school, but we have to deal with things that, we have to make decisions on. So for me, it would be running something adjacent to the system and just then watch that flourish and nurture it. And then it could and potentially, catch fire like a lot of things. And then you've got the right, people in.
I really struggle with this one because I deeply, deeply believe in public education. Education is a human right, not a privilege. And so students, young people should be able to go to their local public schools and not be discriminated against and have that connection and sense of belonging. Obviously, that's not the reality for a lot of young people and for a lot of teachers. And so we hear again and again that, mob are leaving that public education system. So what I'm trying to do, is anyone from the union here, is infiltrate. Because I have these same thoughts and same frustrations all the time. Let's just get rid of the system, dismantle the system. But then the reality is, how can we work within it? So there's, lots of policy change to think about. There's getting this report and the youth guide out to, schools themselves and out to workplaces, into the Department of Education, into the hands of CESOs who, are also members of union, and I agree, a really, really tough job. So getting this report out there, making sure people have eyes on it and are ready to make some change and take these recommendations and actions from the report and from the youth guide, and think about how I've used change the impact, what the impact could be. Yeah, but I agree with you. It's really, really, really tough. Yeah.
I was just thinking about, and me and Cos were talking in our 5-minute break, but the need to fund like not just the schools, but also the community organisations and the cooperatives, and fund those programs that complement the education system properly. I was saying, like, the reason I went to uni was because I went to a Coree junior university program. I'm 42. It was when I was like in year 8, whatever, year 9, I think, whatever that was, And before that, I never even thought about the possibility of uni. And this was like a program that was across Victoria, and all the Aboriginal kids went on this camp, and it was like showing you what university could be, sitting in lecture theatres and things like that. And along with that, like also, programs where they take you out of the school, like the Aboriginal kids, and then you get together with, other kids in the region who might be at a different school, and you do those kind of community building work. So like, while I think like CESOs are really important because they are within the Department of Ed and they do have power, I think that the community orgs also need to have representatives and be properly funded, and programs to support Aboriginal kids to stay in school if that's what they want, or pursue things elsewhere. But we don't want kids leaving because, what's being taught is factually incorrect about local histories, about their own families, or they're getting racist treatment from kids or teachers. Like, we want, like, if people want to go and finish school and go and do a trade or something like that, it should be a choice, not a forced decision. And I think that giving more power to community orgs and community-led responses to education, which aren't kind of bridled by being a part of a state government department or whatever, will only like assist schools to be a better place, I think, for kids to be. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's real deadly. Thanks so much for that amazing question, Tara. I think that'll be our last question too, because we're at time. No, but it was also, I think, yeah, and I think this whole idea too around like public education, I think we also need to think, well, in Australia, there's not really a private education system because every school gets funded from the government. And so why not our own schools, in a way, as part of as part of what we imagine that public learning system to be like. And I really love the examples of like, how do we make sure that what community are teaching our kids outside of the classroom gates still holds as much value and recognition inside the gates. So thank you so much to our incredible panel. If you'd join me in giving them all a round of applause. Again, I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy Thursday evenings. I know that you probably would have had really intense Harmony Day plans that we have cut into. So thank you for prioritizing this tonight. But I do just want to reiterate that a huge thank you to the research team for this phenomenal report. When I started this evening, I said this is an act of truth telling. But what I didn't say is that when we think of truth telling, we got to also think about, well, what for? The purpose of this report is not to relive the traumas or re-traumatize ourselves. With this report comes the responsibility now, after reading it, for justice and healing. We want our learning systems to be places of healing and empowerment, and where our children leave feeling strong in who they are and what they're going to be and what they know and what they can do. But it's also a call for justice. We've laid out the history now of how often and how repetitively our communities have been hard done by the learning system, where the learning system has been actively involved in the colonization and assimilation of our people. And so I really challenge you and challenge us together to work together to ensure that as part of this report, we're doing the work, we're doing the action that comes as part of it. NIYEC will put out, make sure that we're doing that work with Young Mob, but we can't do this work alone. We need more researchers looking at this issue. Sophie Rudolph right there, going deeper in, you know, there you go, Sophie, you're not off the hook. But we need the investment in our communities, and we need the collective energy together to think about this issue from your angle and from your sphere of influence. So thank you again, everyone. Have a safe trip home. Grab something, a feed, a copy of the paper on the way out. But yeah, thank you, everyone. Yes. Yeah, yes. Thank you.